Awesome, people. Welcome to a new episode of NewsHound, and we're still on the Black Hand series. We're on episode 3, and I'm about to introduce you to Horace Dibbin, one of the most British men you'll ever meet, and Andre Gabor Tihamer Boszormenyi, his nemesis, as well as Patsy Morgan Dibben and a few other people. And then I'm going to read you. I'm going to do this with the next one, and then I'm going to read the last two parts together after the series is finished. But I'm going to read you at the end 30 minutes of a Horace Dibbin story. It's a 4-part series that he wrote for the Mirror in or the People newspaper in 1961. About September 1961, he wrote 4 parts, weekly saga, and it was about him giving himself over to the devil and then having to run away from all these Satanists. And he was like, on the front, he's an intelligence operative. He's on the front lines in the media landscape doing satanic panic stuff. So it's a fantastic way to look at what people who were intelligence linked were spreading around back then and what type of fear they were trying to get into the population. And without any further ado, we should get right in to this episode of NewsHound. So we start off here in the newspaper archives, as always, and we're looking at an article that's officially about Mariella Novotny. That's Horace Dibbin's future wife. This lady here is Horace Dibbin's. They get married about a year and a half after this picture is taken. These pictures are taken. These are while she's on set. She's 17 years old. She's on the set of A Quai de Foy, I think it's called. What Little Birds or something it's called, I think. And it was a cabaret show, a raunchy one that came from France, and they wanted to sell it to a British audience, but it didn't work so well. I'm going to read you something, and this is way after to where we're going, but I want you to start you off with this. The Black Sheep, as the West End joint was called, was a curious place co-owned by a curious man named Horace Dibbin. A one-time RAF squadron leader and wealthy antiques dealer, Horace seemed to delight in inanimate things, if very old, and animate things, if rather young. He had been married back in 1931, had a son some 10 years older than Mariella, but was now divorced. I'm not sure if the date of that marriage is correct, and you'll see it soon. I think he was married earlier than that. And I'll have the evidence. So this is where we see whether the mainstream media, this is a daily news article from a paper called the Daily News, whether it stands up to scrutiny once investigated, which you'll usually find there's holes all over the place, and you got to double check everything. You can't take what they say for granted or as given, sorry. To give you a mild idea of his concept of fun, here was his philosophy behind the Black Sheep. I don't want my whole social flock for my members. I just want the black sheep from the titled families. They are the rarest. To implement this carefree atmosphere, Horace said he would offer a free dinner weekly for the socialite who put up the biggest black. That is, committed the worst social blunder. Some of his tastes are as unusual as his appearance. For a time, he was reported to have been dabbling in black magic, and he seemingly labored under a Professor Henry Higgins complex. In George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion and My Fair Lady, the musical adaptation of it, Professor Higgins transforms Eliza Doolittle, a little cockney, into a lady. In the mid-1950s, Horace had adopted Patsy Morgan, 16-year-old grocer's daughter, to bring up exclusively. Changing her name to Morgan Dibben, he transformed her into an assured hostess of a Mayfair society. But a few years before he met Mariella, Patsy left him, despite all he'd done for her. The first weeks, Mariella was an eye-catching sight as she was a waitress in the Black Sheep in a tight black pants and white shirt with matching gold sandals and cummerbund. Then Horace's partner fired her. we're going to stop there. We'll stop there. There is another page of this, but we're going to go through some of this. And so that's from a newspaper back in 1961. And this is later on. So this is Horace Dibbin's wedding. And let's see, they said he was married back in 1933 or 1931. Let's see how close they were. 1928, June the 30th, 1928. So, and we are in the Hampshire Advertiser and Southampton Times. So these are what we're doing now is going through all the source articles that are in the piece, The Third Black Hand, the devil himself. And that could relate to either character, either Hod Dibbin, who was devilish in his ways, or the man Hod Dibbin described as the devil himself, Andre Gabor Bozomeni. Gabor Tihamer Boszormenyi, if you want his full name. And here he is, marrying Phyllis Dean Stent, Horace Dibbin, and young Horace Dibbin, probably with a suit that didn't fit him properly, marrying this woman with this long drip. And you can't see the photo very well, but that's Horace Dibbin's wedding. And it was big enough to get in the paper. Not only was it big enough to get in the paper, but it was big enough to have a bit of a rundown in the Hampshire Telegraph and Post, which showed some of the things that they got for their wedding. Chantilly lace train, that was what the girl was holding. Some of the music that was played, such like some stuff. The bride going away dress was two-piece suit of beige gorget trim with fur to match and red Bangkok hat and lizard shoes. For the evening of the bride and bridegroom left for Scotland, where the honeymoon is being spent. Well, he liked Scotland, did Horace, and you'll discover this. And look, they give a list of the presents: investment shares, check, Horace Dibbin, Harry Dibbin, that's Horace Dibbin's father, H. Dibbin, house and check. They gave him a house. Mrs. H. Dibbin, check. You know, they got lots of money, and this was Horace Dibbin starting his life off. But they were from a very affluent Plymouth Brethren family, and Plymouth Brethren are quite crazy and strict, very good at making their money, and so he was very well off. His dad was already well off. Now, this we'll look at another time, but this is what happens by 1961. So 1928, he's getting married to Phyllis Stent, and by 1961, he's talking about how he became a slave of Satan. There he is, Horace Dibbin next to Mary Ellen Novotny. So this literally goes into how he was an RA officer in the Orkneys, and he went, only after 2 years of this depravity, when I attended a particularly loathsome and horrible ceremony, was I jerked back to my senses and convinced that I must quit this evil cult. This is how he was. And I'll read these articles. These are part of a 4-part article that was in the People newspaper, and I'll read these articles to you, one after this, one after the next NewsHound, and then I'll do 2 later on, because it's a 4-parter and they're intriguing and interesting. It's an intelligence-linked man trying to set the state's satanic panic line. You know, the first ones were about the nightclub trap, so this is where it continues, because Horace Dibbin takes over Esmeralda's barn eventually. So we're going to get here. So I've shown you some of the things we're going to get to for a reason. But by 1950s, Horace Dibbin's life was changing quite rapidly. And here we are in 1955. In 1951, so let me tell you, he gets married. He becomes a squadron leader in the RAF, stationed in the Orkney Isles, and he claims in those 1961 newspapers that he, in the Orkney Isles, he stumbles across and gets chosen by a cult, a black magic circle, who would adopt him as a Grand Master, see him as an Eternal One, seeing his name was Hod, and that means Eternal One in their lingo. And how he basically became a Satanist for 2 years, and all of this. The ceremony takes place on the island of Twat, with 3 T's, TWATT, near the Orkneys, where he says he was based as a squadron leader, or at least an officer. He says officer. Other people say squadron leader, including a gangster. I think it was maybe Billy Hill who said he was a squadron leader, and the newspaper we just saw at the start says he's a squadron leader. So I don't know if he played it down, but anyway, he was an RAF officer. He was that. And when he came back from the war, he seems to have groomed this butcher's daughter, Patsy Morgan Dibben. And about 1945, she becomes his ward. He takes control of her like he's her father, from her father, without any. So I don't know what happened there, but it's very suspicious, like someone just gave over their child to this weird old guy, Horace Dibben. And so by 51, Horace Dibbin has got divorced. He's got a 16-year-old ward in 1945. So for 6 years, he obviously has this 16-year-old girl living as his daughter with his wife. Anyway, his wife eventually says no more, gets divorced. He loaned money from his father, and it meant that because he loaned money, when his father died, he didn't get anything in the will. So he ended up saying that he was penniless, but that might have been a gimmick to try and stop from having the taxman take all his money. Because by 1955, he's having a suspended sentence for not paying a fine, for non-payment of a fine, because he's not paying his national health contributions arrears, not paying other tax things. So he gets a suspended sentence, so he has to pay a certain amount. And then I mean, it's going to be what, a month later, 2 months later, 2 months later in May, he's being declared bankrupt. So in 1955, Horace Dibbin has gone and lost nearly everything, according to Horace Dibbin. Now, Patsy Morgan Dibben, who we'll see in this next picture, you will see on the next page, we're going to get his images. She's down here. It's Patsy Morgan Dibben. What's she doing here? She's representing someone. There you go at the top. Former Somerset farmer Patsy Morgan Dibben runs a publicity agency in London's West End. I like saying that. I wonder if that's Horace Dibbin. I can't quite tell. But that's Patsy by there. And so she was running a publicity agency. There she is again. But it looks almost like, why are these pictures getting the publicity agent in the frame? It seems really suspicious. I can't understand it. So they got a photographer taking a picture of a photographer taking a picture of a woman, but this is so that then they talk about the first and foremost Somerset farmer. They're talking about her rather than mentioning straight away Zena. I think her name's Zena Marshall or something, who's in the picture, which is a really strange one. Why are they bringing Patsy Morgan Dibben to fame? But this was what Horace Dibbin did. He was a real PR agent. He knew how to get them featured in things. Here she is again with another actress helping put her nose on. Former Somerset farmer again helps Jean Carson, star of Love from Judy, with a clown nose, helping her put her clown nose. But that's Patsy Morgan Dibben, and she's going to go missing. And she was the next hostess along from Esmeralda Noel Smith in Esmeralda's Barn. And she goes missing after Esmeralda dies, after all of these other nightclub deaths, after all of this stuff. Patsy Morgan Dibben, who is here being serenaded by Kai Grant, who's a Guyanese musician and guitarist. She's sitting here enjoying being serenaded by this guy in Esmeralda's Barn in this very picture, and she becomes the hostess with the mostess. That's what Horace Dibbin makes her into. And this is where she goes missing. So this is a Sunday pictorial, August of 1956. So you're talking a year after Esmeralda's gone missing, months after all these other has died, and months after all these other nightclub girls go missing. Sorry, not go missing, die. And explained when. Esmeralda's Barn again hits the front pages of the Sunday pictorial with a picture of Patsy Morgan Dibben, and it says something exciting is to happen. and the nightclub riddle. So the Pictorial Reporter reports of Earl of Warwick answers a pick call. The Guardian of a beautiful young London nightclub owner yesterday asked the Sunday Pictorial to help him find her. She disappeared 6 weeks ago. The Guardian is Mr. Horace Dibben, who lives in a luxury flat in Eaton Place, Belgravia. The girl is Patsy Morgan Dibben, 28. 6 weeks ago, she left Esmeralda's Barn, the Knightsbridge club that she had been running for the past year. The Pictorial took up the quest. Last night, we had traced Patsy as far as the French Riviera. A likely story. Are they going to speak to her? No. We put the telephone call through to the Villa Grevilla at St. John Cap Ferrat. The villa is owned by the Honourable Richard Maynard Greville, younger brother of the 45-year-old Earl of Warwick, already hanging with the aristocracy. The Earl himself answered the call. Patsy left by air on Friday morning, he said. For Zurich, I think. I don't know exactly where Richard is, but I think he's touring Italy. I should think he's with Patsy. So he's gone to Zurich, then down to Italy. He's in Italy. I don't understand. There's no mystery about Patsy's stay here. She came here several weeks ago and has been here before. She has been my guest, has been the guest of my brother and myself. Whatever people might have said about this are baseless slanders. We have been friends for a long time, and this was purely a social occasion. I saw very little of her, as she spent much of the time with other guests, whatever friends she may have. Let me see if the thing. Her business, so far as I'm concerned, hers alone. Patsy is quite capable of working out her own intimate problems in her own way. When the dark and glamorous... sorry, I'm still speaking in his voice there. But as you hear there, he gives this rundown, this long rundown, this aristocrat is given a reason to a newspaper why it's all no, she's with them over there. Don't worry about it. Oh my God. And what anybody says is lies. Well, what are people saying? Because I didn't find anybody saying anything anyway. So what is being said? Is Horace saying stuff to get these people to find her? Is this because all the nightclub girls went missing, died in all different ways? Is this from that? Because there's some weird things about this disappearance of Patsy, and then these appearances she has in the newspaper where you don't really know if they're real appearances, whether she's actually alive or if they're just made up to make it look like she's still around by people who are trying to supply cover for people who got rid of Patsy Morgan Dibben. Patsy is quite capable of working out her own intimate problems in her own way. When the dark and glamorous Patsy, a former model, took over Esmeralda's Barn a year ago, she was acclaimed as London's newest and youngest nightclub owner. She's described as a nightclub owner here. The club's previous owner, Miss Esmeralda Noel Smith, had just died in tragic circumstances. Oh, that was convenient for Patsy, but she wasn't the owner, was she? Horace Dibbin was the owner alongside other people. She was found gassed in her flat after a midnight party. Patsy, daughter of South London grocer, was in charge of the club every night until the beginning of last month. Brief note. Before leaving, suddenly, she told the manager, Stephen DeFay, former host of BBC Television's Café Continental, "I can't tell you why I'm going, but something exciting is to happen." For Mr. Horace Dibbin, she left a brief note. She has lived at Mr. Dibbin's home in Eaton Place, Belgravia, since she became his ward at the age of 12. They say 12. That's really worrying. If that's true, then it's before the war, and it's worrying. And he would have had servants, more likely. I mean, they had servants. They had 40. He claimed they had 14 servants in his dad's house. So someone would have looked after her during the war while he was away, if she had been, and gone to him when she was 12. And it is worrying if that's the case. And he joined his name to hers, Morgan Dibben. When Mr. Dibbin asked for the Pictorial's aid in finding her, he said, "I don't know what's been happening. I'm anxious for Patsy to come home. I know that my legal guardianship ended when she became 21, but this doesn't alter the bond between us." After he became Patsy's guardian, Mr. Dibbin sent her to the best schools. She was taught to ride, to ski, to dance, to hold her own with the most exclusive members of the international social set. She was groomed to have sex with people, famous people in front of other people. And that got everybody used to all of this behavior. Stars know her. Patsy was known by her first name, not only to the club's visitors like Billy Wallace, artist Antigone, and Duke of Kent, but also to many stage and screen stars. Well, she was already known because she was already doing the work as a publicity agent. But the rest, saying that she knew visitors like Antigone. Antigone was still going there. He had originally designed it, and then Esmeralda had covered up his design. It will be uncovered again by Stefan DeFay, the manager who was mentioned up there, but in 1960. And Antigone is the man who painted 2 portraits of Queen Elizabeth around this time. The Duke of Kent keeps coming up in this story. So that one is from the Sunday Pictorial, and the date is August the 19th, 1956. And this one here is, I can see it, you can't see it, it's from July 28th, 1957. And so there's no evidence that she is alive. They use the same picture as before, which you can't really see behind me, but they use the same picture before, and they put down Mordaunt Smith, but there's no evidence that she is actually there. This is Peter Hawkins. Now, it's not mentioned who writes these articles. It's put down as pictorial reporters. So whether it's the same person, I do not know. But they Pictorial was owned by Sunday Mirror, but this is also Sunday Pictorial. So this is still Patsy. So it could be Peter Hawkins wrote the last one as well. Same newspaper. Patsy Morgan Dibben, the girlfriend of tenant who taught the airs and graces of high society by a wealthy man, just like Eliza Doolittle in Shaw's Pygmalion, may now marry into society. Michael Mordaunt Smith, 30-year-old nephew of Lord Honor and Brown, one of the biggest landowners in Ireland, said in Dublin yesterday, "Patsy is the most wonderful girl in the world. We discussed marriage this week, as we have done many times before, but nothing definite has yet been arranged." So they discussed marriage, as they have many times, but nothing has been arranged. So they may marry into society. How is this a headline? It's being seeded into here. How is it a headline? A girl may marry. They talked about it, and they're probably not going to do it anytime soon. That's not a headline. That's not a news story for a Sunday paper with a big circulation in the UK. It's not. That's all. Dark and glamorous Patsy, 28, spent the day at the New Forest home of her father in Southampton, a Southampton grocer. She told me on the phone, "It's true, we have discussed marriage. That is all I want to say at the moment." In March, the Pictorial told the fantastic story of Patsy's grooming by Horace Dibben, the antique connoisseur who became her guardian. On her rise to fame in the West End club set, and her decision to leave Dibben because I could not put up with my West End life any longer. So she disappears to nowhere. Patsy was 16-year-old typist when she met Dibben. Again, see? So there's problems with this story. Horace, in the last Pictorial article, it says she was 12, and here it says she was 16. She answered his advertisement, intelligent young girl wanted for antiques business. Later, she changed her name from Patsy Morgan to Morgan Dibben, and Dibben sent her to an exclusive finishing school. She became poised and sophisticated woman, and eventually took charge of Knightsbridge Club, hostess to society folk and stage and screen celebrities. She was trained up to infiltrate people by using her charms, by someone who was ex-military and was hanging around with all the aristocrats who were all involved in espionage in a nightclub that was having dead letter drops and was full of Soviets sharing information, and Western intelligence agents trying to compromise them at the same time. This is what she was groomed for. She was groomed to be really a sex compromise operative, And this is why they're publicizing, or they publicized her, but there's no actual evidence that she's alive. There's a lot of like sensible she's with her dad. Yeah, I found nothing. I found rumors. I found Lillian Pizzacchini talks about her in a book and what she goes off and does. It's all, oh, she's over in Europe and she's jet skiing around the place and all of this stuff. And there's no evidence of it. I haven't found any evidence of her after that time. Well, she doesn't marry Mordaunt Smith. She gave poised and a sophisticated woman and eventually took charge of Knightsbridge. When she suddenly walked out last year, her disappearance was front page news. Yeah, it was, because she no longer existed. She just disappeared. Didn't tell anyone. 6 weeks later, they started reporting it, and she had apparently told the manager, I something wonderful happened. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Mr. Mordaunt Smith said, the last 12 months have perhaps been pretty hard ones for Patsy. I thought she was having a great time. I've known her for a few years, but our romance did not start until a few months ago. This is what they're saying. Now, I think Mordaunt Smith is someone who's going to come up again probably in my investigations, because I investigated a bit about this and there's some very interesting stuff. And there's something really iffy about Patsy Morgan Dibben's disappearance, especially as girls kept disappearing or dying from nightclubs during this period. Now, weird. Here we go. Weird stuff is about to be discussed. So, the Sunday Dispatch. This is 1957 as well. So, the last one is... So, this is 4 months before the last one. So, 4 months before that last one was put in, they put another thing about Patsy Morgan Dibben. Ex-major and girl planned to shoot drop over pole. They'd be the first people to do this. So you think she'd be trained or something like this. But no, this weird thing. It's like so bizarre. Sunday Dispatch reporter. A man who once kidnapped a German general and a beautiful woman who has never jumped from anything higher than a bar stool are planning to parachute down to the frozen wastes of the North Pole. And they hope it will be money-making adventure. No one has ever parachuted into the Arctic Circle, although civil airliners are now flying over the pole. Mr. William Stanley Moss, author of Ill Met by Moonlight, and wartime member of the British Special Operations Services, hopes that on Midsummer Day, that's a bit of a Satanist cultist sort of time, he will be the first. So again, Hod Dibben connected with cults, all of this. Patsy Morgan Dibben goes missing. They give loads of these weird reasons where she are, what she's doing, but you don't see her again in the club or hear about her again. She just didn't like that life. She's gone now. She's over in Europe. Don't worry about her. Nightclub owner. And with him will drop 27-year-old raven-haired Patsy Morgan Dibben. So this is crazy. Grocer's daughter turned nightclub owner and a number of other adventurers. Main idea of the drop will be to find out just how dangerous it is. Let's just drop out. If we die, then we know it's dangerous, don't we? Yes, we do. Okay, let's go. But Mr. Moss hopes that, as in the case of the Mayflower, the film rights and television rights will be sold for larger fees. Mr. Moss told me, I am doing this in the spirit of adventure, but there is a very serious side to it. We will submit a full report on conditions we experience to the Airways Company when we return. Husky dogs, sledges, and all our provisions will be dropped from air in special plastic containers. We will then travel the 200 miles to the edge of the ice where we are to be picked up by boat. Other members of the team will include a doctor, a photographer, and a scientist. One other woman is likely to join the party. Mr. Moss, then a major in Special Operations Services, took part in one of the most fantastic cloak and dagger escapades during the war. With another British officer, he kidnapped Major General Karl Kripe, a German officer who commanded Crete. Miss Morgan Dibben told me, I know people will think I'm crazy to go. Perhaps I am, but it sounds like fun anyway. Right. Bullshit. I call bullshit on this. 1956. She's reported as going missing and no one and a load of people say, "Oh yeah, she's never been to the continent." Next thing, she's being dropped, and she's about to jump out of the airplane to be the first person to parachute over the North Pole. That seems like a big jump, big leap, massive leap. Not just jumping out of the plane. I mean, the going missing, then this, and now I'm out into society. I'm not sure any of this passes the smell test, and this is what you find about Horace Dibbin. Now we're going to get into his enemy. We're in the Tatler. Tatler, oh my God, comes up in a few things, does Tatler. And this is, we're going back to 1935, my friends. And there he is, with the pretty young thing there. The pretty young thing is Miss Martha McGrain. And he, they miss out the G there, but it's Andre Gabor Tihamer Boszormenyi. And Bozomeni is one of the most interesting characters. Aristocrat, Hungarian, I believe a spy, an agent. He's also a master engineer, a master solicitor, a master art stealer, amongst many other things, and a master Satanist, according to Horace Dibbin, the man who will try and get Esmeralda's barn off him in exchange for Patsy Morgan Dibben's life. That's a weird one. And there she is again on a bike, looking pretty in 1935 around the same time. A year later, she's dead. Yeah, her mum was a poet. It doesn't end well for Miss McGrain. I don't know how she died, but she doesn't look unhealthy, does she? So I've been yet to find out how she died. Now, Bozomeni during the war, and this is going through the source, some of the sources. So this is very interesting. This is World War alien internees between 1939 and 1945. Andre Bozomeni, and basically it shows him going into getting taken by Metropolitan Police and interned on the 9th of the 12th, 1941. Suspicious mainly because he was Hungarian. Hungary had at that time in 1941 joined in with the war alongside Germany. And he became an enemy of the state. But I think around here he's possibly recruited. And anyway, when the war doesn't go well, most of the other side say, yeah, I'll join you. And one of the things he invented was these things, pressure exchangers and other type of machinery for jet engines. And he did it alongside Gendrasic and George, I think you'd say Georgie Gendrasic, Gyorgy, Georgie Gendrasic, was a Hungarian man who owned a company that made parts for the Nazi fighter planes, like Klaus Schwab's father's company did, made little bits for the Nazi fighter planes. And Andre Bozomeni, after the war, was helping Gendrasic with that sort of stuff, with designing jet engine parts, which seems like, you know, you got to be pretty good at your stuff to design jet engine parts. So you must be a bit of a master engineer, it seems. This is Andre Gabor Tihamer Boszormenyi. Here he is. Temporary status in Brazil. This is a Brazilian visa. And he says he's from Budapest, Hungarian nationality. He says he was born on the 22nd of the 1st, 1907, which would make him about the same age as Horace Dibbin. But his nationality is down as British. His occupation is advocate, I suppose. So that's probably a solicitor. Estado Civil, Solidari, single, solitero. And that means he's a solicitor. And his father and mother were Oscar and Helena Bozomeni. And his residence is Leicester General Hospital, Gwendolyn Road, Leicester at this point, which is pretty strange. But this guy is a bizarrity. He's an interesting character. And he's got lots of different... I'm in the National Gallery site here. I'm here at the National Gallery site. See, there you go, National Gallery. Here at the National Gallery site, there's an acquisition file dated between the 5th of March to the 9th of November. And this, as you see, description, correspondence with Caesar de Hawk, repurchase of Levi de Chapelet, formerly in Jacques Doucet collection. Correspondence with Andre Bozomeni, rearrangements for making payments out of trust funds for cuttings from Evening News, Daily Telegraph, and Evening Standard, in addition to Gallery's press release announcing the acquisition. Directors, ? Hand notes on the picture and purchase price. What's interesting about this is Bozomeni arranging art, and this isn't just normal art. This is Caesar de Hawk, who's a man who got chased around by the monuments men, the famous monuments men, because he used to sell a hawker, used to sell stolen Nazi art. And Bozomeni is like doing art deals, which is really bizarre. He's hanging around in loads of different places, doing loads of interesting things. He's an interesting character. He is inventor, solicitor, and art dealer. And here we go. We are on here in Tatler again, and this edition of Tatler is October the 26th, 1955. So this is just after, really, a few months after Ruth Ellis's hanging, and a month more after than Esmeralda Gullan's death. And here's Andre Bozomeni with Mademoiselle Mendoza, wife of the Cuban ambassador. So in these pictures, of course, you can see all of these posh aristocratic types. So this is Viscount de Orff and Madame Hageloff, the Marquis Alain Clara. And these guys love their names. They love being royalty. This woman up here is the Marchioness of Reading. Look at that face. See, oh, nice. The Marchioness. Didn't know that was such a thing. Marchioness is the thing. And the Japanese ambassador. So the Japanese ambassador's there too. That's interesting. So down here, as you see, there's Bozomeni, and he's at this stage, his first photos show him being quite a handsome young man, but it doesn't go well for him. He drinks a lot. He's obviously eating caviar and drinking the best possible wine and champagne. He's put on a little bit of weight. So, he looks a bit funky, as you can tell by that picture. This picture of him, though, on his card. Look at those eyes. Look at those eyes. Hod Dibbin said, the devil himself. The devil himself. And there's a lot of similarities between this guy and Hod Dibbin, because Hod Dibbin, of course, is an antique collector and art dealer, and this guy also does the same sort of thing. And there's some sort of wrestling control of a nightclub, and that's got to be due to the fact that Esmeralda's barn was one of the main points for Soviets and Western spies to drop their information. So it's extremely interesting. That's if it's even true, because Hod Dibbin, of course, is a character in himself and lies nearly every second word. So this is why some of this is really interesting. So Bozomeni older, and here he is. This is a bit early, I suppose. This is probably about 1950. What's that? I'm not sure if that's 56. Might be 56. Spanish embassy reception. So who was it here? Well, of course, Bozomeni is up here. Mr. A. Bozomeni, who's meeting people, and there's Peter Fursby. There's Tom Page, the ball committee. I don't even know what that is. Interested to find out. Oh, there you go. Mrs. Duncan Sandys, daughter of Sir Winston and Lady Churchill left. So this is Winston Churchill's daughter. Greets Sir Beverly and Lady Baxter. So these are aristocracy again. Bozomeni is hanging out with the aristocracy, and there he is. He looks a bit like he did when he was younger, so this must be earlier. I would suppose that Bozomeni, who's described wrongly as Monsieur R. Bozomeni, well, it's definitely our boy Andre Bozomeni, with Viscount Aubert de Tiensis and Senor Donji Nadal, first secretary at the Spanish embassy. So this is the Spanish embassy, I suppose, still during Franco's reign. So, I mean, Cuba, Japan, Spain, they all seem like they're the recent enemies or to be enemies or were enemies, you know. Yeah, you can tell this is earlier. This is April the 9th, 1950. And there's more, of course, there's the Brazilian ambassador who's there now. We know Bozomeni has a Brazilian over here. He has his Brazilian visa stamped. And when is this stamped? This is for date is 1950. So that's 1950, that's stamped, and this is 1950. So he's actually meeting the Brazilian ambassador down here in London with his wife by going to this event. And there's a lot of famous people at this event, but there he is, looking like he doesn't want to be photographed. That's like, please don't photograph me face. And it's very interesting. So who he is, who knows? Who he is, who knows? There you go. Oh, also, I found him noted down in the Daily Telegraph in 1950 as well as hanging out at dinner in the Belgian for the Belgian ambassador, and it notes a load of really, really rich people who are there too. Yeah, really interesting stuff. So, I mean, this here is England National Probate Calendar, and this is, I suppose, the end of Bozomeni. Where is he? There you go. Andre Gabor Tihamer Boszormenyi of 23 Down Street, London, W1, died 6th of January 1957. Just like Horace Dibben says, probate, London, 25th of February, to Philip Beaumont Frere, solicitor, someone he acted as advocates to, and he lived in the same place as, or at least registered down in the same place as, maybe his business address. And Sir Henry Joseph de Avidor Goldsmith Baronet. That guy ends up taking over Pergamon Press when Robert Maxwell's ousted, and also goes to work for the American Israeli Bank just after this, so or about a decade after this. So that's really interesting character to be involved in this. And look, effects £43,000, which is probably a lot of money. It's probably like $1 million or something in today's money, maybe more. Resealed, Bahamas. So this was I don't know what resealed means. That's interesting. Maybe there's no one for it to go to. 28th of June 1957, but it was taken to the Bahamas to be done. Everywhere else got all these different places, but Bozomeni's will took place in the Bahamas. Now that is a place we're going to go in the 5th of this Black Hand series. I find that very interesting. And there's a little evidence that Philip Beaumont Frere there, who was mentioned there, lived in the same place as Andre Bozomeni there down the London Electoral Register for 1950. And Philip Beaumont Frere lives in the same place as Andre Bozomeni. So they must be friends, maybe more. Who knows? I don't know. Do you know? I don't think you do. And it says in this newspaper, we got Evening Standard, page 77, said lawyer leaves 31,969. London lawyer Mr. Andre Gabor Tihamer Boszormenyi left 43,000, 31,000, something in his will. So on to the next part, and we got only black sheep need applies, and this is the Mirror newspaper, which is heavily involved with the intelligence operationists Mariella Novotny and Horace Dibbin. They seem heavily involved. They publish all of this stuff. They constantly keeping tabs on them. They constantly advertise them. They set their story down in stone. It seems like they are central to intelligence operations. And it's not a surprise then that you think about the fact that Robert Maxwell then went on to own the Daily Mirror. So it says, only black sheep need apply. It seems that Britain's upper class may soon be competing to make themselves look silly. Antique dealer Horace Dibbin is opening a smart, exclusive nightclub in Mayfair, specially for titled and top people. It's called the Black Sheep, and it's in the narrow lane just off Piccadilly. Horace tells me, I don't want the whole social flock for my members, just the black sheep. They're the rarest. Free dinner. He added, I'm hoping to start a weekly competition among the members. The one who can offer proof that he has put up the biggest black, a social blunder in Mr. D's circle, will get a free dinner. Hod's place opens next Tuesday. He has invited a few hundred guests, among them a goodly selection of Debrett names. I don't know what that word means, Debrett. There you go. We learn something new every day. And I've read this article a couple of times. Oh. For instance, Viscount Euston, Geraldine Lady Strabolgi, the Earl of Warwick, mentioned earlier as well, Lord and Lady Melchet, the Earl of Coventry, Prince Shiva Palatina, and Marquess of Donegal and Queensbury. I don't know how many will accept, but none of them, I imagine, would care to be called black sheep. And the rest is about something else. But this is Horace Dibbin being advertised in amongst the Mirror. They do this all of the time. It's really peculiar. And then they talk about what happens afterwards. Who's this? This is the Evening Standard. Enter the girls in buckskin, but they wait in vain for top names to show up. The only difference between Wigan and London on the wet Sunday night is that they are separated by 196 miles precisely. The paucity of entertainment in our prim metropolis drives foreign visitors marooned in our drab hotels to cut their throats or their losses. Those of us who lack the courage to do either to endure have to endure the sabbatical gloom. No wonder adultery is at a premium. What a strange thing to say. Refusing to believe that the dreariness in the West End was typical of the entire city, I went in search of gaiety. And basically, this is where they're talking about the fact that they went, he goes around and looks for a place, he can't find anything. And then he ends up in Horace Dibbin's place. So he said, this state affair was held in Gold Lame Cellar. The proprietor, Mr. Horace Dibbin, my name isn't really Hod, but Horace, and his partner, Miss Pat Steele, had invited everybody to party, including Sir Winston and Lady Churchill, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Mary Callis, Tommy Steele, and Aristotle Onassis. Interesting, Aristotle Onassis gets invited, seeing as that his daughter and JFK, and the fact that Horace Dibbin is, of course, going to marry Mariella Novotny. So they talk a lot about different things that were happening, but none of it's that interesting. But he said at the end, we don't seem to have any real fighters in Britain nowadays. He sighed. I feel very despondent about it. I waited for the Black Sheep's guest list to lengthen. It didn't. I left, and that was it. So it didn't go off well, and you would think Horace Dibbin failed in attracting people. And soon there's also evidence 1958. So that was ahead. So you got that 1959. So a year behind that, you've got 16-year-old, this is in the Daily Herald, and it says 16-year-old model Maureen Shelley told me last night she had received a marriage proposal from Mr. Horace Dibben, the antiques dealer, who is 53, but she says she hasn't yet decided whether to accept. Dibbin, you remember, was the guardian of Grocer's daughter, Patsy Morgan, whom he swept to fame as society hostess. As Patsy Morgan Dibben, she ran a nightclub which became the rage of the smart set, including the Duke of Kent. Maureen is a shapely redhead who lives in Cavendish buildings off Oxford Street. Told me Mr. Dibbin has met my mummy, and we all had a talk. Mummy says it's up to me. I am thinking it's over. Maureen's mother is a model, Irene Brenton, age 35. Mr. Dibbin, or Hod as he is called around the West End, was not at home in his Eaton Place home when I called. Maureen told me, he is throwing a birthday party for me on Sunday. Mummy is coming. I have known Hod for about 2 months, really. He is a wonderful man. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play you a read through of the first article he writes in this Satanist extravaganza for the Daily Mirror. Let's stop this now. And it's a really interesting one. So we're going on, and there's a lot to catch up on with Hod Dibbin. So Hod Dibbin, he has loads of money trouble in the 50s, mid-50s. He's gone into bankruptcy, all of these different things. Then 57, Patsy Morgan Dibben leaves him. And then Andre Gabor Bozomeni drops dead. There's loads of rumors about Patsy Morgan Dibben. She's supposed to be on the continent, but who knows? It seems like lots of people said a lot of stuff, but they were all people involved in these same circles. And there's no evidence Patsy Morgan Dibben survived, apart from rumors that have been picked up by loads of other reporters. But there's no actual first-hand evidence of it. So that I find that really interesting. Secondly, within this whole series, there's a lot that will be going on. And when Esmeralda Gullan died, and then all of the rest of these other nightclub hostesses and the like died, and then there's this disappearance of Patsy Morgan Dibben. Well, this isn't going to be the only disappearance. There's going to be more death as well. I think it's either Esmeralda's Barn or the Black Sheep, where a jazz musician dies as well. They find him with his head in a gas oven. And of course, the Krays are going to take over Esmeralda's Barn, so that's going to get hot as well. And they were right in the center of intelligence. They put themselves around properly. And we're entering into a new stage. The next part of this is 1960 onwards. His new Pygmalion girl has come to work in the Black Sheep, and after 3 weeks, she's supposedly been fired by his partner, and he's offered. So Hod Dibbin's offered to marry him, and it's pretty clear that that's what happens because it's advertised all over the place in January. I think it's about January the 30th in 1960. Hard and Mariella marry, and then everything gets crazy as well. I mean, they were the people who hosted the Men in the Mask parties, sex parties, and they were involved in like early sexual compromise operations that are just gonna, they blow people's minds when you hear about them. But there's lots of other details, and really, what I'm doing in this series is setting the scene for and finding information and characters within this that no one else has kind of explored. And I'm looking for the wider context to why a lot of these people and where a lot of these people were focused, linking names. And in doing that, I found some really new, fresh characters who haven't been explored properly or thoroughly enough, and have often been explored by people like Lillian Pizzagini and Douglas Thompson. Sorry. Who use a lot of erroneous information in with their facts to make for something else. And so I hope you really enjoy this series, and I hope you enjoy now hearing in my own version of Hod Dibbin's voice the first part of Hod Dibbin's satanic slavery series in the Mirror. You get a good idea of his character. So thank you for sitting around and watching this stuff. I know it was a bit jumbled on this occasion. There was a lot to take in. And I hope you enjoy the articles, but there is so much more to this series, so much more to come. I'm really excited, and thank you. Goodbye. So without further ado, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, my little friends, and we are going to have a look at this. Here we go. We are in our first paper of this NEWSHOUND. So I'd only have to go to the British News Archives for this. And there's his face. Hod Dibbin, it's hard to see. He's got the print coming through. Page 2 of The People, Sunday, September the 3rd, 1961. And 4 articles got published in this series by Hod Dibbin. This one is called, and I'll have to skip to the next one. This was called, here you go, Slave of Satan. So that's the next page. So they're double-paged, double-spread articles. And it says, Amazing Confessions of a British Officer. What is the truth about black magic? Can we afford to laugh off the persistent, sinister tales of weird ceremonies all over Britain? One man has decided time has come to utter the solemn warning to anyone tempted to join these loathsome practices for fun or curiosity. He knows the terrible consequences, for once he was embroiled in a terrible cult himself, and still bears the scars on mind and body. By Hod Dibbin. Strange things have been happening in Britain over the last few months. Weird ceremonies in deserted woods, graves opened at dead of night, dolls' heads stuck with pins sent through the post. Sinister or comical, the evidence of a horrible cult at work, or just childish mumbo-jumbo? Well, most people laugh when they read of such incidents and dismiss black magic as the work of a set of cranks who should learn to grow up. I know better than to laugh. Whenever I hear the other examples of this horrible cult in operation, I'm filled with a thick horror. There was a case of that wretched man from Ceylon who nearly drowned himself after a curse laid on him by black magic practitioners in London. There was that West End dancer who was lured to a black magic ceremony and forced to watch an obscene ceremony in which a naked girl was tied to an altar. There was that man in Birmingham who went mad after taking part in a lewd ceremony. It has horrified me to read of all these incidents. It has appalled me to see how the dreadful cult of the devil worship is spread in London to seas to every corner of this island, or these islands. I know only too well the depravity, the obscenity, the degradation of the practice of black magic. I know that the cult has only one end: spiritual, mental, and physical ruination. I know, for I was a slave of Satan. Once I was prepared to take part in any depravity to please the devil, my master. Looking back with shame and revulsion on that part of my life, it is hard to realize how fanatical I was. I regarded honesty, faithfulness, and purity as despicable. Now he's talking about a 2-year period where he's saying he had managed to find honesty, faithfulness, and purity is despicable. Before, of course, he didn't, and afterwards he didn't. Not sure. A lot of this, as you see, is bombast. Of course it is. It's Hod Dibbin. Death threat. Obscenity and sexual depravity were qualities to be admired, yet somehow I came to my senses in time and shook off the mantle of evil. It was not easy to do so, for in repudiating the black art, I risked the vengeance of its leaders, and for 15 years the threat of death has followed me. I know that it is fervent desire of the leaders of black magic in Britain today to silence me forever, but silent I cannot be. In the light of the recent evidence of sinister practices in Britain, I feel I must utter my solemn warning of the terrible consequences that may befall anyone who is tempted, for kicks or curiosity, to dabble in the black arts. The disclosure of this horrible chapter of my life may shock the people who know me as one of England's respected gentry and a leading expert on antiques and art. Just as they were shocked recently to hear that my beautiful 19-year-old wife, Mariella, had been named in a vice investigation in New York after being associated with TV producer Harry Allen Towers. She was innocent, of course, and we are now starting life afresh in a new flat near Marble Arch, which seems another good reason for making a clean breast once and for all of all this sordid side of my life. In making my confessions, I threw myself on the understanding of my family and hope that they will forgive. The upbringing they gave me was everything one could expect from a wealthy county family. It may be, however, that my father was a little too strict with me as a devout member of the Plymouth Brethren. He enforced the strictest discipline in his household. Each morning he presided over prayers, which were attended by our staff of 14 servants. Every night we had to be in bed before 9. My father hammered into me the idea that sex was something unsavory and bad to be avoided by all decent people. Girls galore. I think it was this strict, straight-laced atmosphere at home which made me glad when the war came and I joined the RAF. At once I felt a different man, reveling in my new freedom. As a young flying officer, I had girls galore ready to fall at my feet, and I took an intense delight in scorning all my father's strict warnings. Looking back, I think Satan caught me on the rebound. I was in the mood ripe for his temptations. It was at this time that I was posted to a camp on the Orkneys. It was bleak, remote, cold, but within 2 days of my arrival at the camp, a remarkable incident occurred. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of my window being opened. I could see no one there, but on the windowsill was a bird's nest with an egg in it. I touched the egg, and it was still warm. Then, to my horror, I found blood on my finger. Looking at the egg again, I saw that a swastika was drawn on it in blood, still wet. Next morning, I went to report the incident to my CO. Leaving the nest on a table in my room. On the way to the CO's office, I had to pass the window of my room. Out of curiosity, I looked in at the mysterious nest and egg. They had vanished. An explanation was beyond me. I had left the room locked. By now, I was really frightened. That night, I was lying on my bed reading when there was a knock at the door. In walked a beautiful redhead. I guessed immediately she was a member of the concert party that had arrived that afternoon. She smiled sweetly at me, sat down on my bed and said, "You were expecting me, weren't you? Perhaps you were, without realizing it." Indignantly, I asked her to leave my room at once. "Certainly," she said. "I will see you at the Black Croft at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning." Next day was Sunday, and after breakfast I decided to go for a walk. I had almost forgotten my visitor of the previous evening. I walked for 3 hours, heading for a hotel where I could have lunch. At last, a hotel came into my sight as I walked over the hill crest, but something else caught my eye beside the wood nearby, a black croft. An uncanny feeling overwhelmed me. Automatically, I walked towards the croft, where, when I was within a few feet of the croft, the door opened, and there was the wet redhead waiting for me. She led me into the darkened interior. After a few seconds, I was able to make out the shadowy figures of 10 people sitting in the middle of the floor. They were dressed in long white robes and pointed hats with slits for their eyes and mouths. The girl threw me. I can just stop there and have a look at this picture. Evil leaves its mark. Can't see what the picture is, it's too blurry. On Horace Dibben's leg, he can still be seen an arrow-shaped saw where he was branded by devil worshippers with a red-hot iron. Well, I suppose that must be it round by there. Here you go. And just in case this story scares you, you get Nervoin for nerve pain. There you go. The girl threw me similar garb, and without hesitation, I put it on and sat in the circle. By now, my fear was being replaced by a strange fascination. One of the men leaped forward, and from beneath his cloak he pulled a white cockle, which he handed to the girl. She swiftly drew a knife across its throat, killing it instantly. Holding the bird aloft, she allowed the blood to trickle over her. Every part of my body trembled. I knew this was black magic ritual, but how did I fit in? By what token had I qualified to join this weird gathering? Hanging. There was no time for further thought. Two other ghostly figures leaped up, bound the girl by her ankles, and suspended her from the beam in the roof. Not a word was spoken. The girl moved slightly to and fro, eyes closed, arms outstretched. After about 5 minutes, her lips parted. By all that is in putrefaction, we bid welcome to our new brother, she said. He is our number 11. The god of fire and stone demands his acceptance of the all-embracing brotherhood of evil. I sat transfixed as the entranced girl uttered the most dire warnings of what would overcome me if I dared to renounce the brotherhood. Business disasters, the death of my best friend in a car crash, the loss of my home, banishment from my father's will, and finally dissection of my person to whom I was devoted. Eventually, I did renounce the brotherhood of Satan, and all those tragic happenings came true. We both left the barn singly. As number 11, I was last apart from the girl. I walked with her back to the camp. I asked her name. In the circle, I am known as Sarah, the goddess of desire, she said simply. Then she added, you were chosen to join the circle because you have qualities we seek, and because of your name, Hod. In our faith, Hod means the Eternal One, and we knew you could give us every lasting joy. As we parted, she said, your initiation will be arranged for July the 4th, when the Earth is at its greatest distance from the Sun. I saw the girl frequently at the camp during the next few weeks, but she never gave any sign of recognition when we met. My instinct told me that the matter had gone far enough. It was ridiculous, disgraceful that a person of such respectable family background as myself could become involved in a loathsome practice of black magic. But I knew that I had gone too far to back out now. Also, I must be perfectly frank and admit that I wanted to continue. I felt an exhilaration I had never experienced before. I began to look forward to the initiation. As each day passed, I waited eagerly for the summons. At last it came, in the form of the message I found in my shoe one morning, calling me to the altar of acceptance at sundown on July the 4th. I arrived at the Black Croft at the appointed hour to find everybody in their places. In the center of the circle sat Sisera, her golden red hair glinting by the light of a small fire. The silence was broken by the chanting of the girl. The symbols of the opposites shall become as one, and all power to our father Satan. For those sitting in the circle around her repeated the last words, and all power to the father Satan. It was sung with the same monotone that the priest uses in church, but there was nothing Christian about the disgusting ceremony in which I was about to take part. My clothes were ripped. That sounds exciting. Let's get to the top. My clothes were ripped from me and flung into the corner. I stood facing Sisera, who also began to take off her clothes. 3 huge wooden trays were placed between her and myself. On the first was the head of a newly killed ewe. The rest of it remains so piled on the other 2 trays. The rest of its remains were piled on the other 2 trays. The most barbaric and bestial ceremony followed, in which all human senses were degraded. The ceremony lasted several minutes, at each stage progressively more horrible. The circled members jumped to their feet and cried out, "All power to Satan, the master of all!" At last it was over, at least so far as my actual initiation was concerned. As I flopped face down in the corner of the barn, defiled and ashamed, I heard the others pull off their robes, but leaving their hoods intact, and begin an orgy which lasted until dawn. There were men and women members of about equal numbers, and they gave vent to their most outrageous expressions of lewdness that is possible to imagine. But I was mistaken if I thought I had been forgotten. As dawn approached, I was pushed into a crazed mob and forced to take part in further indignities, which culminated in the rites of the elders. My hands and legs were tied, and 2 people placed their hands tightly over my eyes. Then I heard the cry, "Do you submit in brotherhood?" I murmured a feeble "yes," and at once I felt an excruciating pain on my right thigh, followed by the smell of scorched flesh. I was released, and in the light of dawn, which was creeping through the cracks of the roof, I saw that my leg had been branded with a hot arrowhead. It is a mark that I bear to this day, the mark of horror and shame that can never be erased, although I have long since renounced these loathsome cults. I am left with a constant reminder of my service to Satan. After my initiation, I entered wholeheartedly into the affairs of the circle. These consisted mainly of meetings in the barn, about 1 a month, which were little more than an excuse for orgy making. Each meeting was preceded by a ceremony in which due respect was paid to the devil, and a period of confession during which each member was asked to give details of his conduct. If anybody had been guilty of performing a good deed, there were shouts of "traitor to our lord and master," but confessions of wrongdoing of any kind were greeted with murmurs of approval. At the end of the confessional, before yet another bout of pleasure-seeking, there were wild shouts of "all praise to the holiness that comes from the bad." In all these activities I took the fullest part. To my everlasting shame, I have to record that I entered into the spirit of evil and obscenity with the utmost vigor and with no sense of guilt. This went on for nearly 2 years. Of course, the girl, Sisera, had left with the concert party after a few months, but she often returned to the circle for an event of special significance. Such an event was a human sacrifice on the day of last reckoning, which is at the end of the black magic year of activity, just before the approach of winter. I did not seriously believe it would be a human sacrifice in the true sense. I imagined it would be arranged symbolically, like so much of devil worship. I soon learned how wrong I was, and the fiendish rite in which I participated on the day in 1944 was so sickening, so barbaric, that at last it jolted me to my senses and made me resolve to forsake my life of evil. There before us, on the hill outside Orkney village of Twat, was the naked, frightened figure of a pitiful young girl, bound tightly to a withered tree trunk. Facing her, a few yards away, was an enraged ram, its nostrils quivering, its whole body straining against the rope that tethered it. One of the circle held a knife poised over the rope. The scene of utter bestial horror that followed is something that I could not erase from my mind in a million years. Wow. So there you go. That ceremony took place on a hillside outside the Orkney village of Twat. Oh, hard. And it says up here, no, a young girl lies bound before the altar dedicated to the glorification of evil in its most loathsome form. It was into such a rite that Hod Dibbin, as an RAF officer, suddenly and strangely found himself drawn. So there you go. That's the first part of this article, if it can be called an article. Next week, I try to escape from the devil, but death strikes twice. Uh-oh. An escape from the devil. Doesn't sound easy to do. And there's a little... So this first episode, and it's incredible, really, to see. This was in the People magazine, which is a Sunday version of the Mirror back in the day. Now it's Sunday Mirror, and maybe the People is still going. I don't know. They might have finished it along, like they did with News of the World, like big giant paper companies rebrand themselves when they do too much illegal stuff. And this was on Sunday, September the 3rd, 1961. It wasn't hidden away in the paper. This was page 2. And there is Hod Dibbin, married to Mariella Novotny, who is one of the most interesting people in history. And that is the first part of his series in these newspapers. As you see, there's someone there taking the rights. Oh my God, this is despicable. And amazingly, this guy, who's massively intelligently linked, is talking about how he became a Satanist. And this is just after, as you heard in here, this is just after, shall we quote him? Just as they were shocked recently to hear that my beautiful 19-year-old wife, Mariella, had been named in a vice investigation in New York after being associated with TV producer Harry Allen Towers. And it's extremely interesting, but that's the first of them. And so it's really important. We're going to read 4 of these. And I think this is seeding the satanic panic narrative. This was one of the many people who were chosen by intelligence to seed this satanic panic narrative into the media. And the media, especially the people in the Mirror newspaper, loved covering Hod Dibbin and Mariella Novotny. There was many different times where they covered them and their bizarre exploits. And we'll read the second part soon. This is fun. Of course, there's a lot more to this, and the articles you get to see the other side, what was actually happening at the same time. So that's Black Hand. And that's really about the rise of or the merger between gangsters and intelligence operatives from the British side and merging into the American side, and then basically eventually working together to become the same thing. Where originally a lot of this was about competition; they were competing with each other, which you will also see within the series. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's come off it. Stop the share. Right. I hope you enjoyed that. That's a sneak peek into the world of Horace Dibbin, and we'll do another one soon. We'll do all of these articles. We'll go through each of these articles, and we'll then look at some of the people who were involved as side characters. So I hope you enjoyed that. It's been Funky Monkey. And of course, NewsHound special edition, special Horace Dibbin edition. So I hope you enjoy the articles as well. Black Hand, I put a lot of love into them. There's more coming out soon, and there's a lot more to be found in history. The one thing you find about written down history in newspapers, etc., is that not everything was recorded. Lots of things weren't. Lots of clues to what was really happening are available, but lots of misdirection is given by newspapers and by mainstream media, by intelligence agencies, by actors like Horace Dibbin. So they want you to be looking at the Satanism. They don't want you to be looking at the sexual compromise of leaders and the downfall of the British government. So, these are people who are like, look at what I am. I'm a ridiculous Satanist. In actual fact, he's a ridiculous spy. For this episode of NewsHound, catch you later. Bye.
Shaping a great reset for the post-Corona era.